Where is in the society today, where's the influence? Where do you see the power of ideas coming from today?
Well, they clearly are not coming from liberalism, which is in terrible trouble intellectually. I mean, I can point out how much trouble it is simply by asking you to name me the leading liberal columnists of today. The best and most well-known columnists are conservative or neoconservative: George Will, Charles Krauthammer, and others. Ideas are coming from the left. The left is an idea-generating organism, but they are very peculiar ideas, very seditious, which is obviously what the left always wants, but half the time not quite comprehensible. The left has become so academic in our day, so irrelevant in one sense, except in the educational system, where it is very relevant. But it no longer is populist, as it once was. The right has become populist. That is, conservatism has become populist, aiming to speak to ordinary people. And I think the most interesting ideas today, and I don't know anyone who really disagrees with this, come from the various conservative think tanks, plus some individual conservative scholars in the universities.
You say in the book that your wife, Gertrude Himmelfarb, is a Anglophile, and you're a Francophile.
I have become something of an Anglophile since then.
What do either one of those mean?
Well, an Anglophile is someone who thinks Britain is an especially admirable country to be studied and learned from. The Francophile believes that about France. As it happened, by sheer accident, I spent my last year in the army after the war in Marseille, and so I got relatively steeped in French literature and French thought. And so I was more of a Francophile than an Anglophile. My wife did her PhD thesis on the great British historian Lord Acton, so she became an Anglophile. But by now the two have merged as the result of 53 years of marriage. Both Phillies are now one.
You write about historians. What do you think of historians today?
Historians today? Well, there are some very good historians today, but of course historians today in this country, as in other Western countries, have been influenced by what is called postmodernism. That is to say, relativism of an extreme kind, plus all sorts of other ideas as to what the function of a historian is. So I think, like many of the academic disciplines in the humanities, history is in a state of crisis, and historians are muddling around in this state of crisis.
You say that no one's ever written a book about the Federalist Papers?
That, at the time that I wrote,
it was 1970 or something like that?
Yeah, no one had ever written a book about the Federalist Papers.
Has that changed?
You know, I'm not sure. One Swiss scholar wrote a book about the Federalist Papers. I think, I haven't followed it that closely, I think there may be a few books. But you know, it's interesting the way it's ignored. I mean, it's almost impossible if you're a political science major at any university to take a course in the Federalist Papers, or in law school for that matter. You think law school would be interested in finding out what the founders really thought. But no, there are no courses in the Federalist Papers, or at least not many, either in law schools or in political science departments.
Why do you think, how important were the Federalist Papers?
Well, I think if you want to understand the political philosophy of the founders, they're very important. I mean, what else do you have to go by? You have to go by the arguments that they proposed for the ratification of the Constitution. I mean, this was their explanation of why the Constitution should be adopted. You have the debates of the Constitutional Convention, plus the Federalist Papers, plus, I guess, the ratification proceedings in the various states. But the Federalist Papers are so brilliantly written, largely by Madison, some by Jay, and are full of so much political wisdom that I really feel that as part of an education in American politics, students should be required to read a lot of the Federalist Papers, not just one or two, which is what often happens today.
You know, a lot of these books that we do there's a thread that comes through them. You may have started the thread, but the thread are things like Hayek and Milton Friedman and a Frenchman named Tocqueville. And you write about the fact that you wanted to do a follow-up to the Tocqueville Democracy in America book. What's your connection to Tocqueville?
I read him. My connection to Tocqueville, I didn't know Tocqueville until around, I guess it was the 1950s or late 40s, something like that, when Democracy in America was reissued. It was out of print, and I read it, and I said, this is absolutely wonderful and profound book. It's still probably the best book ever written on American democracy. When I left the Reporter magazine in 1960, I decided I was going to write a book on democracy. And I tried. I collected a lot of notes, and I spent 3 months on it, working very diligently, and I realized it was beyond me, that I just didn't. I had a lot of ideas. They didn't cohere and wouldn't cohere into a book. So I decided to become a professor instead. But yes, Tocqueville was a great and profound thinker.
Say that no one ever calls himself a Tocquevillian.
No, but of course, look, I mean, he did not found a school. And for many decades in the United States, he was ignored. Many, as I say, when I was in City College, no one read the Tocqueville. Hardly anyone had ever heard of him.
I don't know whether you can do this, but when you read a book like yours, and again, it's got 41 essays, you get a sense that there's these different strata in the United States. And there's a strata up here that pays attention to Hayek and Tocqueville and all these names, and then it comes down to a next level, goes all the way down to the average person. What do you think of people that are just the common person that never gets into this? How much of this influences them, and how does it come through the system?
It'll influence them obliquely and indirectly. Look, those people are my family. Goodness, I mean, I have no problem with ordinary, non-intellectual people. I have 34 first cousins, and so far as I know, I was the only intellectual in the family. But I love them all. They're fine people. But the ideas filter down through the educational system, through the media, through a few politicians who are always hungry for ideas by which to distinguish themselves from the crowd of other politicians. And before you know it, an idea has gained some momentum, and there it is on the agenda. A lot of it is accident. You never know how and where and when ideas are going to impinge on reality. Ronald Reagan was persuaded to adopt supply-side economics by Jack Kemp, who got it from Winskiy and to some degree from myself. And he had a council of economic advisors during his campaign. Of the 12 members of that council, one was in favor of supply-side economics. All the other very distinguished economists were originally against it. But Jack Kemp persuaded Ronald Reagan this was the way to go. And in the end, they all fell into line. And that's the way ideas have impact. I mean, it's not quite predictable what's going to happen.
So you're saying that somebody watching this out there who might consider themselves a benefactor or a victim of supply-side economics, that it all started back here with you?
With me? No.
Or if you go back beyond...
Well, it started with Jude Winskiy and a few other people.
But where did they get, or where do you get your base for supply-side economics?
Well, I got it from Jude Winskiy.
And where did he get it?
He got it from a couple of economists, one out in California, one then at Columbia, who were rather unorthodox.
Where did they get it?
They invented it.
Just dreamed it up.
Yeah, they invented it. I mean, it was an original idea with them.
You can't go back...
some version or another.
You can't go back to Aristotle and Plato or Montesquieu or somebody for this?
No, there is original invention in the history of ideas. People do have original ideas sometimes.